Hello. So today we're going to be looking at working with files in Python. So the key function used to work with files is the open function. Okay, so we're going to be using this function to open files. We can read from them and then write to them if we want to. Okay, so there are 4 different modes for opening a file. Okay, so there are 4 different modes when working with a file. Okay, so the first mode is called read mode. Yeah, and the way that we impose read mode is with a special parameter that we add to the open function. That is R, and we will get to how to use that later on. Yeah, this is the default mode. Okay, so we don't need to specify it, okay, because this is the default behavior, but it doesn't hurt to add this on. Okay, so how does this work? It opens the file for reading. Okay, and we get an error if the file does not exist. Okay, so that is the read mode. Okay, we also have the append mode. Okay, and we impose the append mode with the A character. Okay, we'll see where that goes in a bit. Okay, so this opens the file for appending. Sorry, opens the file for appending. Okay, and much like how we append to a list, we can also append to a file and add on to whatever is existing. Okay, and just a note, it creates the file if it does not exist. Okay, so we can use this append mode to create new files that don't currently exist. Okay, then we also have the write mode. Okay, and then this is with the character W. So this opens the file for writing. And creates the file if it does not exist. Yeah. Okay, then there's the optional X parameter that we can use. This creates the specified file. Okay, and returns an error if the file already exists. Okay, so we can create a new file with this write mode. Okay, if we use W, then it opens the file for writing and creates the file if it does not exist. And if we use the X parameter for the write mode, then it creates the specified file and returns an error if the file already exists. So with this X parameter, it has to be a new file that we're creating. Okay, so those are the 4 different modes, the R, A, W, and X. Okay, so in addition to these, we also have 2 different types of files that we can work with. Okay, so 2 types of files. Okay, so the first one is just a text file, so that's the default. So a text file, so we use the extra parameter t, and this is the default value. So you can leave it out if you want it to be a text file, or you can add it and it won't cause any issues. Yes, that's the default. And we also have a binary file. Okay, so if you want to work with the raw bytes of the file, for example, images, videos, and so on, those aren't text files. That is a different file format. Okay, so it's not text. Okay, so then this is binary file. We can use B. Okay, so that's for things like images, videos, etc. But we won't be working with that. Okay, we will be working exclusively with text files. Okay, so these are the different parameters that we can use to specify how we want to work with these different files. Okay, so let's have a look at an example of how to open a file. Okay, so to open a file for reading, okay, we just need to specify the name of the file. Okay, so for example, we can have a variable called file, and that is equal to open. So this open function will open the file on your system and then allow you to manipulate it with the read and write methods. Okay, so using this file object. So open, and then we can say my file dot text, for example, and this will then open the file provided it exists on your computer, and then you can read and write to it. Okay, so this is the standard way of opening a file. However, if we know that it's a text file and we want to read to it, we can specify these parameters we have above. So remember, R is for reading, and we can use the parameter T because we know it's a text file. So we could also use file equals open, the same file, my file.text. And now we can specify those extra parameters R, T. So remember the R, this is for read mode. And the T, that's to specify that that's a text file. Okay, but remember text file, that's the default, and read, that is also the default. So you do not need to specify those, but it doesn't hurt to add that. Okay, so just a note on this. We add the R parameter because we want to read. And we add the T parameter because we know it's a text file. Yeah, but as I said, those are the default behaviors, so you don't really need to add that. Okay, so once we have our file, we would like to read from it. And the way that we do that is with the read method. Okay, so the open function returns a file object, so the file. Okay, so that's just a programmatic way that we represent the file is with the file object, okay, which has a method or function. Here we can use those names interchangeably. So method or function called read, yeah, and which we use to read from the file. We use to read in the file contents. Okay, so as an example, we can say file equals open myfile.text, and I'm not specifying any extra parameters, so that means it's a reading from a text file mode. Okay, and then we can read from it, and let's say output it to the screen, so we can say print file.read. So this method here, the read method, reads all the contents as a string. And then the print method, we've seen that before, that will display the string. Okay, so together, print myfile.read will read everything in from the file and then display it to the user. Okay, so that is reading everything at once. If you would like to go through your file one line at a time, okay, sometimes you might want to do that. Then instead of using the read method or the read function, we can use the read line method. Okay. So you can return one line at a time using the read line method. Or function. Okay, so just to go over that again, the read method, that will read everything at once. The read line method, that will go one line at a time. Okay, so as an example, we can have file is equal to open. Again, myfile.text. Then we can read one line at a time. So let's say we want to just read the first line. We can say print file.readline. And then this will now display the first line in the file. So this displays the first line in the file. Okay, you may have more than one line, but if we just call the method once, then we're only going to get that first line. Okay, if we want to get other lines, then we're going to have to call the method again. So let's say we want the first two lines, we can say file is equal to open myfile.text. Yeah, and then we can save each line as a variable. So we can have line 1 equals file.readline. So that will give us the first line. Line 2, file.readline. That will give us line 2. And you can continue this. Okay, so you can do this line by line if you know how many lines there are. And there's not too many lines, you can do it like this. However, if there are lots of lines, we don't want to do it manually like this. Okay, so this is fine for a few lines, but we don't want to do this manually. for lots of lines. Okay, so you might have a lot of lines that you want to go through, or maybe you don't know exactly how many lines there are. So this method of going through line by line, that may not be the best. Okay, so instead, we can actually iterate through all of the lines using a for loop. So we can iterate through all the lines using a for loop. Okay, so much like how we iterated through a list to get each element, we can also iterate through a file where each element in the iteration will be one of the lines in the file. Okay, so we can say file. Sorry. Okay, so we can create our file object. File is equal to open myfile.text. Now just imagine we don't know how many lines there are, but there's quite a few. And we want to go through each line individually. So what we can do is we can create a for loop. So for line in file, okay, remember the colon, and we can print the line or do something else with the line. Okay, so we can specify something else to do with the line if we want. Okay, so this is very similar to how we iterated through a list, but now we're iterating through a file object. So very similar to how we iterated through a list. But now we iterate through a file. Okay. So this is the basics of going through files, reading from them and writing to them. So remember, if you want to write to them, we can use over here, we can use the write mode or the append mode, and then we can use that to write to the file. Okay, so instead of using the read method, if we want to write, we can use the write method. So writing to a file can be done using the write method. Okay, so just an example of that, we can say file is equal to open myfile.text. Okay, but then we can specify append if we want to add to it. Okay, so with the append method, it saves everything that you've done to the file previously and only adds on to it. Okay, if you're just writing to a file, it will override what's already there. Okay, so be careful about writing to a file where it overrides the stuff or appending to a file where it adds new stuff. Okay, so just be careful about those two. Okay, and then we can say file.write, new line. Okay, and then once we're done with the file, remember that we need to close it. And we do that with file.close. So remember to close the file when you are done with it. Yeah, because if you keep the file open, then it may not be accessible by other programs. Okay, so once one program has the file open, you can't use it elsewhere. Okay, but once you close the file, then it can be used elsewhere. Okay, so that is all the basics that you need to know for files. We will go through a bit more on files during the tutorial. So a bit more on reading from specialized files and routing to files. Okay, so you'll see that in the tutorial on files. Okay. And if you do have any questions, please just email me. The details are on the webpage. And also you can visit me in my office if you have questions as well. Okay, I'll see you next time.